Welcome to Addressing Anti-Semitism Across Borders. Thank you for joining us from places near and far. I want to give a special welcome to the guests from both National Council of Jewish Women, National Council of Jewish Women Canada, and Jewish Women International that are here with us today. My name is Sheila Katz, and I'm the CEO of National Council of Jewish Women, which is now in its 130th year. And our big 130th celebration is next week in DC, and we hope you'll join us. You could find more information at www.ncjw.org/130. As we begin today's call, which is on International Women's Day, it seems fitting to lift up NCJW's founder, Hannah G. Solomon, who 130 years ago attended the Chicago's World Fair, which is a lot like today's Aspen Ideas Festival, and was supposed to present on behalf of Jewish women. When she got there, the men asked her to pour coffee instead. So she left and founded National Council of Jewish Women. But the slightly longer version of the story, which is relevant to the context of things we're navigating today, is that Hannah first went to the women's groups and they said, no Jews. So NCJW was founded to make sure Jewish women have a seat at the table and our voices are heard. And there has always been a link to gender discrimination and anti-Semitism, which is present even in our founding story. And this intersection is all too relevant today. After the last few months, when we've seen such a violent surge of anti-Semitism after the October 7th attacks, we witnessed international silence. And still today, more than 130 hostages are held captive by Hamas. It is known that many of them are experiencing ongoing sexual violence. There are 19 women and girls still hostages, and we have to bring them all home. We have to bring back our girls. There is so much work we have to do in this very broken world of ours. And there is nowhere I would rather be today on International Women's Day than with two amazing women who are leading in the international fight against discrimination, anti-Semitism, and all forms of hate. I'm so honored to have Ambassador Lyons and Ambassador Lipstadt with us today. And I'm going to introduce them both, and then we're going to hear from them. First, I'd like to introduce Canadian Special Envoy on Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism, Deborah Lyons. Ambassador Lyons is a diplomat with 25 years of experience in international relations, political affairs, security management, and development. Ambassador Lyons previously served as Ambassador of Canada to Israel, Ambassador of Canada to Afghanistan, and Deputy Ambassador of Canada to the United States. Ambassador Lyons also serves as the United Nations Secretary General's Special Representative for Afghanistan and head of the UN Assistance Mission to Afghanistan. During this time, she spearheaded the UN's support for peace efforts in Afghanistan, championed increased regional cooperation, led preparations for the successful 2020 Afghanistan Donor Conference, and oversaw the UN's continued operation after the Taliban took over in 2021. For her work in Afghanistan, Ambassador Lyons was recognized by the Community of Democracies with the Mark Palmer Prize. This recognition is conferred to a diplomat who has employed bold and effective means to encourage states and assist civil societies to advance democracy and human rights. Thank you, Ambassador Lyons. We are so excited to learn from you today. And next, I'd like to introduce Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, who serves as the Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. As Special Envoy, she leads efforts to advance U.S. foreign policy to counter anti-Semitism throughout the world. Ambassador Lipstadt has a storied career as a historian, academic, and author. She has held roles at Emory University, University of Washington, UCLA, Brandeis, Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and Occidental. She is best known for the 2016 film Denial, which I highly recommend, which depicted the case that Holocaust denier David Irving brought against her that resulted in Irving being declared by the court to be a Holocaust denier. She was a historical consultant to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and held a presidential appointment to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council. Thank you, Ambassador Lipstadt. We are so grateful you are here with us today. Thank you both. It's truly an honor. So let's jump right in. Given that today is International Women's Day, I want to start by asking you both about your own leadership. What inspires you to do what you do, and what does it mean to be women in such leading international roles?
Why don't let you start? I'll be Canadian and say, and gracious.
So what, Sheila, you're asking thank you so much. And great to be here with everyone, and happy International Women's Day. We're certainly seeing a world where we as women have much work ahead of us, and we're going to get it done by doing it together. So it's great to be with everybody today. Thank you for the opportunity, Sheila. So you're asking me what inspires me to do the work I'm doing? I guess I'd have to say, first and foremost, other women. I mean, we get our strength from one another, and of course, from the good men in our lives. My mother raised, 9 children under the, with an income well under the poverty line, and she worked every day to make life better, and ended up with university educated children who went off to do wonderful things like I'm getting the opportunity to do. I also have to say that I'm inspired by my time as a diplomat working in Israel, most certainly, and working in Afghanistan, and recognizing, that as a daughter of North America, so many parts of the world live with a level of insecurity and deprivation that we don't really experience here in North America. So I think that my 10 years recently abroad really, I think, fueled me even more to say we've got a lot of work to do to continue to support not just North America, but the world at large. And while I was abroad, I would look back at this beautiful island of North America, and I was beginning to get concerned that, frankly, things were starting to crumble here, and that polarization was creeping in, and hate speech. And even though I had thought I was going to come back and, learn how to cook again, and plant my garden and play with my grandchildren, I was very worried about hate speech and what it was doing to erode our democracy. So I had committed myself to come back and do work on hate speech in whatever format. So, in terms of a woman in this job, as you'll see from Deborah and myself, there are many other special envoys who are female, who are doing this tough work. I think we bring to this job that intense inspiration that we have as women for a better world for our children. But also, our communication skills, I think, as women are outstanding, and that's desperately needed right now. Our compassion, our ability to multitask, and our ability to look at the strategy and what needs to get done, and then get on with the work and get it done. And we'll talk more about that, I know, in the next hour. So, Deborah, over to you.
It's hard, Sheila, to pick a few things that inspire me, but certainly I saw it at home. I was raised in a home where my parents encouraged me. The legacy in my family is that my first multi-word sentence was "me do it." And my siblings would tell you that that's still true. I've just been lucky to be in places where I could do things. I mean, now as I look back on the Irving case brought against me, I don't think I would have said this when he first brought the case, but I was lucky that he picked me out. I was in Israel during the 6-Day War as a very young person, but I was there. I got to travel to the Soviet Union early in the refusnik movement and meet refusniks and have a run-in with the KGB. So I've had experiences along the way which maybe have brought me to this moment. In fact, hanging on my wall outside the view of the camera is a verse from the book of Esther, which we'll read on Purim very shortly, from chapter 4, verse 14. Perhaps you were born for such a time such as this. Mi odea im leit kazot higat lamalchut. And sometimes, I don't know, it's who knows if for this reason you became queen. Mordechai says to Esther that I don't think being special envoy and ambassador designated to take care of anti-Semitism is a queen of anything. But most of all, Sheila, I feel lucky. There are so many people, and last week I was at earlier this week I was at the ADL conference. Last week I was in London, where I spoke to hundreds and hundreds of people, as well as government officials and others. So many people, not just Jews, but particularly Jews, and particularly Jewish women, given everything that's gone on, wake up each morning worried about what's going on and wondering, is there something I can do?
Mhm.
And I get to wake up each morning and figure out how am I going to do all the things on my list that I do. So
Mhm.
it's in certain respects, it's worrisome, it's a burden, but more it's a privilege. It's really a privilege to be able to do this on behalf of my government, on behalf of Jewish communities and Jews individually who are looking to people such as us for guidance, inspiration, protection, and helping them understand these difficult times.
Yeah,
And
well, we're
Sheila, I'm
certainly.
just going to add one last point, and that is that I know for Deborah and for myself, what also inspires us is the generations to come and the work we need to do to leave them a legacy that is a brave and courageous demonstration of how we worked hard to build a better world for them. And I think right now we're all very worried about that world.
Amen.
Yeah. Amen. Exactly. And I think you both referencing your family and now thinking of the generations, the way it is not the way it has to be. And I'm just so grateful that you both wake up every day to jump into the fight to make the world better for everybody now and for everybody to come. And I think, we started by saying this International Women's Day is supposed to be this day of deep joy and celebration. It's a little hard in this moment where so much is going on to look at it. But for me, what gives me joy today is talking to both of you, to amazing women leaders in front of me. And I'm just so grateful for what you're doing each and every day. I do want to transition as we're thinking about the complexity and what makes it difficult to celebrate a bit around talking about the trends in anti-Semitism that you're seeing. Ambassador Lyons, I know you started, I think you were sworn in on October 16th and you started October 17th in the midst of quite the intense time. So I'm curious to hear from you what you're seeing in Canada and around the globe. And Ambassador Lipstadt, you've been in this role a little bit longer. So I'm curious from you to hear a little bit on your reflections on a post-October 7th world and whether you're seeing anti-Semitism the same or different than previously and whether that even matters. So I'll let you two decide who goes first, but some of your reflections on the trends in anti-Semitism globally.
Well, I guess, thank you, Sheila, for that excellent question. Let's be clear that anti-Semitism was on the rise before October 7th. I mean, as I track the data in Canada, we were seeing an increase almost commensurate with the pandemic. And we saw both with the pandemic and then I think with the increased cost of living and stress that people were feeling, we often see during these stressful periods, unfortunately, and almost, unimaginably, but we see a related rise in anti-Semitism. So we had been seeing a rise in anti-Semitism in the 3 years previous, to October 7th of 2023. So that in and of itself is disturbing, but again, an indication, and which is why our government created this position and why the wonderful Erwin Kotler, who was in the position before me, did so much work along with Deborah and others. And when I came into this job, I came in with a clear set of priorities of work that we needed to do. And to ensure that increase we were seeing even before October 7th was being countered. And that was in the education field, certainly working with our universities, working on data collection to get a much better understanding of what really is happening out there, working with law enforcement so that we had trained officers dealing with anti-Semitism on the streets, hate crimes, hate incidents, intimidation. Working certainly with social media, working with the major platforms to make changes there, and we can talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, continuing the work with our leadership right across the country. I think after October 7th, what we saw was a huge spike in anti-Semitism, when in fact, what we were expecting to see was the reverse. We were expecting to see compassion from Canadians. We were expecting to see, an outreach to the Jewish community of support. And in fact, what we have seen, I think, around the world is this incredible spike in anti-Semitism, unprecedented, with, both online, on the streets, in our universities, frankly, even in our schools, in our places of work. And so it's clear that much needs to get done. I suppose in some ways I feel that as challenging as I felt the job was before October 7th, and as much as those priorities were critical to deliver on, they're even more critical now. It's much more intense. And as Deborah said, yes, it's a privilege to be in this job at this time, but it also puts upon us an enormous sense of duty to get the hard work done. And this is one of the things that I want to continue to stress to people. I continue to stress it to leaders when I meet with them, particularly political leaders, that this is work for all of us to do. At the local level, the mayors need to stand up. The school boards need to stand up. The teachers need to stand up. We need the curriculum in those schools, because what we're seeing as one of the trends is an enormous lack of information and education on the Holocaust to begin with. Who would have imagined? On the history of the Middle East, on anti-Semitism. So all the more reason to get the work done on the IRA definition that needs to be done. Continuing to work with the police to make sure we've got the training in place, all of these things that must be done. But in order to get it done, leadership has to stand up. And I see my office very much as a multiplier force, bringing people together, but also doing the necessary agitation required in the advocacy to get leaders across Canada, frankly, around the world, to step up to combat this. We must come out of this period not scarred, but stronger. Because the work that has been done since, in the last 80 years has really been building a better society, which is why we are all here celebrating International Women's Day. We cannot let that slip away. This is a crisis moment when all leadership has to stand up. Our office has got to do that. And I'm worried about a trend in a crisis within leadership itself, where people are not speaking up, they're not taking action they need to take, they're feeling discomfort, they're feeling intimidated, they don't have the information they need. We need to work with the leaders to give them the ammunition to do the job that needs to be done along with all of us. Deborah?
Okay, thank you, Deborah. And if I could almost say ditto and just go with that. But look, before October 7th, there was a spike in anti-Semitism, a surge in anti-Semitism. I wouldn't, excuse me, I wouldn't have left or taken leave of absence from a very comfortable academic job where I got to teach a few classes, do seminars, and mostly sit and work with students and then research and write my books, to take on this job if I didn't think there was something to do and something serious to do, and B, leadership that would support me in doing it. And of course, I've had that support. But prior to October 7th, one of my great foci was on the Abraham Accords. My first trip out of this country was to Saudi Arabia. I'd been to Morocco twice. I've been to Tunisia. I've been to the Emirates a number of times. I met with their officials here and in other countries as well. And it was really a feeling that against this background of this then existent surge in anti-Semitism, we could begin to build better relations. And my interest, particularly in the Abraham Accords, given the remit of my office, was less so on the relations between these countries and Israel. That I have their diplomats, the two countries' diplomats, whichever country's in question, could work on. And of course, I have colleagues in this building, hundreds of colleagues in this building and other parts of the world who are working on that aspect. But the thing that really attracted me to or gave me solace and hope in the Abraham Accords were that so many of these countries had populations which had been educated, had learned that, Jews were evil, Jews were bad, and Jews were not indigenous to the region. And I wanted to work with those countries and began to work with those countries on reshaping that narrative, on changing that narrative, because it wasn't just in the countries, but many of these countries were responsible for sending out funding imams to various mosques in various places, whether Brooklyn or Brighton, England, or Brighton, New York, or Berlin, or any other cities that don't begin with B's. And while I don't think they were sent abroad to preach anti-Semitism, many of them did. And I wanted to work with the Abraham Accord countries to counter this. And it's still an agenda item for us. But of course, Sheila, your question was October 7th. and everything changed on October 7th. I was in Rome on that Shabbat morning, Chag. It was during Sukkot. I was getting ready to go to synagogue, and I heard the news, and everything has changed since then. It's changed and it's remained the same. The anti-Semitism we're seeing is not that different, but the surge, I went from a surge to a tsunami, you know, and it went, and the glee, which some people have engaged in overt anti-Semitism, is really quite sobering. You know, and it's some, and I'm not talking about, and I don't think your audience, because you've got a sophisticated audience. Many of them my friends, because they told me they would be on this morning. I come with my own entourage, you know. They know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Criticism of Israeli policy is not ipso facto anti-Semitism. We all know that. If that were the case, as I've said so often, if that were the case, then the hundreds of thousands of Israelis who spent every Saturday night on the streets of their cities in Tel Aviv and in other places protesting the proposed judicial reforms would be enemies of, would be anti-Semites, which of course is ludicrous. But we've seen so much of the supposed criticism of Israel be not just suggest anti-Semitism, be overtly anti-Semitic. Just a few days ago, on the Upper East Side, in front of Hunter College, a group of students stood with a megaphone and said something to the effect, Sheila, you may know the exact wording, Jews got to decide, do you support genocide? They didn't even say Zionists, which is very often online, just a code word for Jews, but they said Jews. A basketball team in Westchester, New York, from a Jewish school, the game had to be called because a high school team, because the other team was engaged in Free Palestine, pushing the students, assaulting the students. We've seen this in Canada. We were just talking about a visit when I made to Canada at the end of last year, where we had lunch in a Jewish deli in Montreal, where the owner, this was the third generation of the deli and his family's ownership, and with his partners had said to him for the first year, don't put Hanukkah decorations in the window, we'll get, you know, it'll provoke trouble. And I listened, he served us a delicious lunch. And I just wondered, you know, I felt badly. I felt that he felt, you know, that they felt such fear. But I wondered if maybe it wasn't an overreaction. And then a few weeks later, a kosher deli or a Jewish deli in Toronto had its windows smashed. So clearly he was more attuned to things than I was at that moment. We see it in so many places. Synagogues, Jewish schools being assaulted, Jews being assaulted on the street. And one of the problems, and Deborah and I were just talking about this before we went on air, one of the problems is the failure, and you alluded to it in your remarks, is the failure of leadership. Whether you're talking about the prime minister or the president of your country, whether you're talking about the rector or the president of your university or your school system or your high school, to take it seriously, to speak out expeditiously and unequivocally, and not to hedge. There was a recent event at a university where a speaker from Israel the event had to be shut down because there was such protesting outside. And the leadership of the university put out a statement. Anodyne, you know, is too kind a word. For those of you who know kashrut parif, it was as bland as could be. We support free speech, and we're looking. It was more of an insult. Better they shouldn't have said anything. 5-6 days later, they issued a statement which called it anti-Semitism and said it has no place on our campus. I was glad to see the second statement, but it should have been obvious to them. If an event about Israel is being shut down and students are protesting and yelling anti-Semitic things outside, it's clearly a form of anti-Semitism. Or when people talk about globalize the Intifada, what is globalize the Intifada except attack Jews globally? That's anti-Semitism. We're seeing that, and as Deborah and I have both been speaking about, a failure of leadership on all levels to condemn it unequivocally and rapidly.
And I think, Sheila, to your question, just to finish off on that, we have to ask ourselves, why are leaders not stepping up? Why are they not stepping up quickly? Why is it taking 5 days to get the statement you should have gotten on the day of? And I think that's part of the responsibility of, well, it's not our responsibility as such, but it's part of the work of our office to be working with leaders, whether we're talking about university presidents, rectors, legal counsels at university, who I think are playing a big role here, security on the campuses, certainly with police, although I have to admit in Canada, I have seen some real engagement on the part of our chiefs of police and really trying to work with all the communities and trying to deal with the issues on the streets in a way that I think has been more constructive than we've seen from other areas of leadership. Where are the state governments? Where are provincial governments? Where are other faith leaders, non-Jewish, non-Muslim faith leaders? Why are they not stepping up? Why are the business leaders not stepping up more? I think that people need to recognize that, frankly, we're in crisis right now. And with that crisis comes a lot of discomfort. So our offices need to be working with the various leaders to help with that discomfort about you need to deal with your discomfort as a leader. You need to be courageous. And these are the things that you need to be responding to. These are some of the words you need to be sensitive to. And these are some of the actions that you can take that is within your purview. I find on many aspects right now, leaders are feeling paralyzed to engage, and that has got to shift in order for us to come out of this in a healthy manner.
Yes, thank you both so much. I heard a few themes in here. It sounds like obviously anti-Semitism has always been a problem, but it seems like there's a bit of a normalization of anti-Semitism. We, of course, have to respond to it, but I heard a theme of both the education beforehand, what it looks like to prevent these things from happening, and not only talking about the people who are doing this and holding them accountable, which we must, but also the people around it, almost like in the who can play a role in making a safer environment for Jews. You mentioned a lot of them, and it's like the bystanders becoming upstanders, people who we expect to do this and to ask more from them, which leads right into my next question, which I'm sure you're not surprised I'm going to ask. You mentioned a lot about the silence of kind of university presidents and people in this space, but particularly given the violence that perpetrated by Hamas against Israeli women, the intentionality of rape as a tool of war, right? It wasn't a ransom thing. It was an intentional part of the attack. We heard this loud silence, the best way I'll put it, from the international community, particularly the United Nations and many more. And so I guess as we think about this like intersection of that silence, of anti-Semitism, of gender-based violence, and more globally, I'm curious how you think we got to this place, what you see playing in that intersection, and if you have other thoughts on what we need in this moment.
Sheila, you're well aware, and I think you may have shared it with some of your members, that in the beginning of January, Ambassador Michelle Taylor, the United States representative to the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and I co-authored an op-ed, an essay in The Guardian, a left-leaning, I know we need leaning, newspaper in England, in which we looked at the gender-based violence. And we were speaking in the name, really, it was clear when two ambassadors issue something like that, it's not just, oh, let's go write this and we send it off, but it's cleared by many offices and at many levels. And what we argued was that if you look at other instances of gender-based violence, which of course is a very anodyne, to speak of anodyne, way of talking about rape, mutilation of women, all sorts of sexual violence, and not just women, by the way. We've now, according to the Special Rapporteur on Gender Crimes of the UN and their report, I don't have her title exactly correctly, the report they issued just a few days ago, it was against men and boys as well, that this sexual violence was, as you properly put it, Sheila, it was not look, you have sexual violence very often as an outcome of war, as a consequence of war. Soldiers often do bad things. They're human. There's a war. I'm not excusing it at all, but they're in a position, and they of course should not be doing that, but that happens. But this seems more clear.
Planned.
More clearly, it happened in so many places in the same way. It doesn't seem to have been just a consequence of war. But the question that Ambassador Taylor and I asked is, how come when this happened with Boko Haram, when the girls were kidnapped and there were all this, bring back our girls, bring back our girls. Or how come when the Yazidi women who were subjected to some of the worst, and you saw it probably up close and personal, so to speak, because you were in the region, what happened to the Yazidi women, which there was an outcry, not enough of an outcry, but an outcry, or even the Iranian women who were just taking off their scarves and they were being abused, and in fact, we now know some of them were murdered. People didn't say, oh, give us the evidence. Oh, show us the exact, what happened. Where are the victims and why aren't they speaking out? In the case of October 7th, most of the victims of rape can't speak out because they're dead. They were murdered, as the report indicates. But there was silence. So Ambassador Taylor and I asked, how do you explain the silence? What's going on here? And the only difference we could find was the perception that these were all Jewish women. They were not. There were Druze, there were Bedouins. There may have been foreign visitors who had come for the rave or come to work on the kibbutzim or just to be there. But the perception was that they were Jews and they deserved it. That's anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I don't think there's any other conclusion that one can draw that it was anti-Semitism. It was also an element of misogyny, sadly.
Absolutely.
To mention that on International Women's Day. But it was clearly anti-Semitism. I mean, the thing that was so shocking about it, in a sense, is that there were actually various types of documentation, either from the video cameras, from the pictures that Hamas themselves took, and what we saw on TV actually on October 7th, the morning of October 7th. And then, of course, the admission by a number of the Hamas terrorists who had been captured. So I don't think there's any other conclusion than anti-Semitism, loud and clear, and misogyny. I think there was another element that I found equally disturbing, and that was a sense, again, of discomfort that somehow people who should have been speaking out and condemning this and providing enormous support to Israeli women instead held back because they somehow felt that if they spoke out on this, then they were being less concerned about Palestinian women, which makes no sense to me, that we are not evolved enough as human beings that we can't say this here deserves our compassion, our attention, our condemnation. And this may also be happening, and I am concerned about it, but people allowed themselves to be, again, paralyzed. And I think very, very, very wrongly, very sadly, I think it's a moment in our history for women overall that will be very damaging. When I came out with my statement on this, I said, not only is this a huge injury to the Israeli women, and of course to men who would have been sexually abused as well, but it is clearly a major step backwards for the protection of our women and our girls in the future. This was a major fault on the part of so many people, particularly those people who've been working for women's rights for so long, who remain silent.
Yeah,
Sorry,
just
please go ahead.
just to add to reinforce the other Deborah's very strong and unequivocal statements. A few weeks ago, prior to my trip to London, I was in Munich at the Munich Security Conference. And I was privileged to be in conversation, just the two of us, with former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And she spoke out so strongly on this. And she told of an event that happened at Columbia University, SIPA, where she at School of International and Policy Affairs, Public Affairs, where she now teaches, where they were having a conference on sexually based violence. And they were talking about Sudanese women, Iranian women, Ukrainian women, etc., and Israeli women. And there was a tremendous protest that the meeting almost had to be shut down. And what I said there and what I have said recently and said publicly, and I know, Sheila, you have said similar things, that it's wrong for anyone. I don't care, male, female, whatever their right, left, center, whatever their identity or however they choose to identify, to remain silent in the face of these kind of sexual crimes, criminal acts. But it's hypocritical when groups whose raison d'etre is feminism or human rights to remain silent. Then, what happened to Me Too and Believe the Women, it's just, and it's not just hypocritical, but as Ambassador Taylor and I came to the conclusion in The Guardian, the only difference here from all these other instances where there's been an unequivocal condemnation is that these were perceived to be Jews, to be Israelis, and that's anti-Semitism.
And let's go back to the horror of the sexual assault and sexual mutilation on October 7th, because we have in the last 20 years been very clear about rape being used as weaponized as a form of warfare. This was not a byproduct of an attack. This was an integral, planned part of the attack to sexually assault and mutilate. So it is even more egregious, even more horrific. So for people not to speak out in this case is even more extreme. So yes, lots of work for all of us to do. And people need to continue to be called out and be held accountable for having been silent at a time when they should have been their loudest.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate, for so many of us who have been sitting in this silence and how hard it's been, I appreciate like the directness, the crystal clear nature of this not being that complicated, right?
It's not complicated at all, Sheila. It's
rape is bad.
It's not complicated. There's nothing complicated about it. When it comes to rape, when it comes to mutilation of men with sexual mutilation, there is no but. I don't care how you feel about the politics of the Middle East, the politics of Israeli policy, the politics of Gaza. When it comes to rape, there is no but, especially, as Deborah Lyons has just said, when it's not an outcome of war, but it's a policy, it's a weapon of war. And anybody who kept silent in the face of that has lost all credibility. They don't come to me with other issues because you're not a credible spokesperson, excuse me, oh my God, anymore.
I will say I was on a panel the other day at the ADL conference, and there was something that I think it was Carol Nuriel from the ADL in Israel said that I was holding on to actually as a result. She said that actually seeing the silence and feeling and experiencing that as an Israeli woman has led her to reflect on how she can actually do more and say more in the future when these things happen elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And I think, there's a lot to take in. We want to hold everyone accountable who we need to, and also hold up the mirror and say, how might we speak out even more when there's this kind of violence against women perpetrated in these moments globally in our own backyard, and learn from the silence to become even better allies and to do more. And so I really appreciate it. It's one of the first times I heard somebody articulate thinking of the examples in which the world held up Bring Back Our Girls with the hashtag, thinking about whether everyone in the Jewish community had done that and how we actually use this as a moment not to distance ourselves more, but to show up stronger than ever before. And I certainly hope more people will come along.
But Sheila, you're pointing at something that is really very hard. Because certainly the members of National Council and of Jewish Women's International and so many Jewish women's groups have engaged in that speaking out, have been at the forefront of that, not in a strategic fashion. We'll be good to you, so things are bad for us, you'll be good to us. Not at all in a strategic fashion,
out of the heart.
But out of the heart and out of the belief that this exemplifies what their tradition speaks to. Justice shall you pursue, it says in the book of Deuteronomy. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. the Torah thought it important enough not to say pursue justice, but say justice, justice. They repeated it twice because it's hard. And people have put themselves on the line again, not in a transactional kind of way, but because they believe it. And it's so hard when your partners show not only not the same commitments, but when your people and your group and your identity group is being attacked in that way, not only do they keep silent, but in certain cases they say, well, yes, but somehow you deserve this.
I agree completely with what the other Deborah has just said. And I think this has been so much a part of the additional pain and hurt and injury and anguish that Jews are feeling overall, but particularly Jewish women with regard to this silence on sexual assault. But I do, Sheila, want to pick up on what you have just said, because we are definitely in a time of crisis. We are definitely in a time where we are all being tested. And so I kind of commend the way in which you have just captured that because I find that this is an intense learning experience that I'm going through on a personal, emotional, psychological, physical, this is such an intense time. And there are so many challenges in front of us on every level, and a disappointment in leadership, a disappointment in partners, a disappointment in allies, a disappointment in on laws not being, implemented and so forth. But I think we, as we were saying earlier, we have to come out of this, somehow struggle out of this, the better people. And by that, I don't mean Jews, I mean all Canadians, I mean all Americans. We have got to take this moment of crisis and say, how are we going to evolve out of this in a way that allows us to be better human beings in the future? Because there are a lot of mirrors being held up to us right now, and we've got to learn from those images. So back over to you, and I compliment you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And know that these reflections aren't at all for me about not holding accountable people who have been silent. It's really shameful. And there is learning and growth in all of this for all of us. And so, I'm here today, obviously, representing NCJW, but I'm also here on behalf of our partner organization, Jewish Women International. I know Meredith Jacobs, their CEO, is on the call right now. We love working together, and I love seeing women working together. And one of the things I'm really loving on this call is seeing you two sitting next to each other, Deborah and the other Deborah. Now we know if your name is Deborah L in some way, you too can be an ambassador. But I think what's so interesting about your roles and what I'm watching from both of you is how you're working with one another. I know Ambassador Lipstadt, you just recently took a trip to Canada. I know Ambassador Lyons, you're sitting right now in the United States in Ambassador Lipstadt's office. Can you share just a little bit of what, in the midst of all of this that we're holding, what does partnership across borders in combating anti-Semitism look like for you?
Well, one of the things that's been so encouraging to me is that so many other countries, I don't even know how many, I should know. Do you know how many special? I have appointed special envoys. The most recent one,
35.
I think 35. Argentina just has appointed. Romania, so many countries have appointed special envoys or the equivalent. And a couple of years ago, I think even before I came into office, they began to meet together. And we've continued that tradition. Sometimes they meet under the auspices of the World Jewish Congress, but often we meet just government to government and meet together in an informal session, exchange online assessments, and we work together because we know it's a force multiplier. Speaking personally, I am, I think, the fourth person in this job, and you've known many of those people who preceded me. They had a luxury that sadly I do not have. They had the luxury of being able to go to other countries and say, let's say France after Charlie Hebdo and Hyper Kasher, and say, you have a problem, and we in the United States are very concerned. When I go now, I say, we have a problem, and we are very concerned. But absolutely there is a feeling that in strength there is numbers.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree completely with Deborah. I mean, we're not going to get through this alone. We're going to get through this together, and we're going to learn from one another. So I have been in Washington these last couple of days, meeting with Deborah's Critical. She had a great trip to Toronto, and I learned a lot from her there. In fact, Deborah has helped me to kind of to expand a little bit the focus that we're putting on anti-Semitism, not just as an erosion and a threat to democracy, but in fact, even a threat to our national security. And so that's an area that, you know, we're working on together. While I'm here, I met with Ellen Germain, of course, who's the special envoy for Holocaust Remembrance. We are all part of a larger team of special envoys, whether it's on anti-Semitism per se or Holocaust Remembrance. I'm just fortunate to have both mandates and to have a domestic mandate as well as an international. So I want to kind of take what Canada is doing, how we're struggling through this with, you know, the fourth largest Jewish community in the world and a country that, you know, sees itself as very diverse, very respectful, very kind, very open, certainly a just society. As we struggle through this crisis, what is it that we're focusing on? And therefore, what are others focusing on? And how can we share? In fact, Deborah and I were just discussing this morning how we were going to share some guidelines on how do leaders respond in these crises. Also, while I was here, I met with folks in Senator Schumer's office. They've done some amazing work. I mean, I have to say, I do read Senator Schumer's speech over and over when I'm having a bad day, because to me, it was one of the best speeches I've ever heard on anti-Semitism and so topical and timely for this moment. We identified a number of areas where we're going to work together, certainly in the area of curriculum and education, and how do we get more public information and public education out there on anti-Semitism? Because frankly, Sheila, we can't wait for all the kids to grow up after they've done the curriculum. We've got to work with the adults now, because we've seen anti-Semitism exposed in a way I think we had hoped it would never be. And also there's a number of areas we're working with on training of police, as I mentioned earlier, but also data collection, really getting an accurate picture of what's happening out there. So a huge amount that I think we can do together. And, you know, we're part of the special envoy team for IRA as well, which is an organization now that is incredibly mature, and I really believe is well prepared to speak to the world. The UK heads it up this year, and their theme this year is a brilliant one for this time. Their theme of Holocaust Remembrance this year is in plain sight. So let that be a lesson to us, not just about 80 years ago, but in 2024 as well. And then lastly, we're part of a special envoy team of about 5 or 6 people who are working on online harm, and how do we meet with the major platforms as a collection of influential countries to try to work through the damage that's being done there. So there's a litany of areas where we need one another, and we're just lucky to have great people like the other Deborah to work with.
I know our time is almost up, so I just, to add to that, and there's not much that needs to be said about that, but the cooperation that we've seen, the sharing of ideas across borders, across continents, is very important. And it brings us back, Sheila, and maybe to close with this, it brings us back to where we began. Governments increasingly see this as a serious threat. You can almost divide the world into the governments that take it seriously and those that don't. And I think there are far more who do take it seriously. And I'm often asked, maybe in my previous existence as a historian, or my continued, but for my diplomatic, put on my diplomatic kippah, if you would, a yarmulke, if you would, is this 1938? And I say no. Or is this 1933? I say no. If you're talking about countries like Canada, if you're talking about countries like the United States and so many other countries in Europe, in Latin America, etc., it's the governments are concerned. If you look back at the 30s, it was the governments that were doing this. So the fact that you are talking to 2 people, a seasoned diplomat who has been around the world and that was dealt with some of the most important topics on the recent international agenda, or someone such as myself in a position that was elevated to ambassador, not because of me, before I was even on the horizon, that the Congress thought this was important enough to elevate to ambassador, that the State Department has thought this is important enough to expand my team remarkably so. And to know that I report directly to the Secretary of State, that this is of concern at the highest levels of our administration and in a bipartisan fashion, it should give us all a great deal of comfort, and in these dark days, a ray of light.
It sure does. It sure does. Even seeing you two together gives us a lot of hope. We have to learn from one another. When there's failings, we have to fail fast and learn from it and share and grow. This is a really complex problem. We are just forever grateful and every day grateful that both of you choose to get up every single day and take everything that you've got and fight for a better world for all of us. And I think Ambassador Lipstadt, when you mentioned Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof, justice, justice, you shall pursue, justice being there twice. It's a great way as we're wrapping up just to hold on to this. You are the people pursuing justice. We are here to support you, to learn with you, to share with you, and to cheer you on. It is hard, complicated work, but on this International Women's Day, we celebrate both of you, and we're grateful for you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Remember, we are all Esthers, and that's what you just described that Deborah and I do every day. That's what every one of the women and some of those men who are online as well. That's what we're all getting up to do every day, because we all have a role in this. We just have to have some titles that keep us pretty busy and a little bit of an office. But thank you for this incredible opportunity. And you know, let's check in from time to time with one another on the progress we're making, and get the advice from your incredible audience there. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So maybe we'll say to everyone as we're closing, maybe we were all here for this moment. We are all the Esther.
Exactly. Well said, Sheila. Katz. Well said.
Yeah.
Once again,
Yeah.
well said, Sheila.
Happy International Day.
Thank you.
Happy International
Thank
Women's Day. Thank you to everybody for joining us, and thank you for this rich conversation. And if you want to keep up the work, you know, there you can follow their offices, National Council of Jewish Women, Jewish Women International. Happy International Women's Day. Let's all fight to repair our broken world together.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you all so much.
Okay.